Okay, I'm going to walk through building this 8-step mix assignment. What you're going to do is on our Blackboard page, you'll go to week 9, and you will find this set of folders here. It's called Files for Audition Practice and 8-Step Mix. You can click on this folder. It's going to take you to a couple different things. We've already done these practice tracks. What we're doing is we're borrowing from this 8-step mix. But before we start saving these files, let's go ahead and create a folder on your computer for these files. You go down to the blue face icon, the Finder icon down here, click on Desktop, and I'm just going to make a new folder. I'm going to go to File, New Folder, make a folder called 8-Step Mix. That's fine. I'm going to open up that folder, and then I'm also going to go up to Finder. While I'm already in Finder, I'm going to go up to File and New Finder Window. I'll have 2 windows here. And in this second window, I'm going to open up my Downloads folder. This will just have all of my downloads. You can see my list here. You might have a different list of downloads, or it might be empty, but I'll have those open. Then I'll go back to my browser, and I will find each of my files here. This one called NPR Training Craig Foner. I'm going to, there's a couple different ways you can download it. If I right-click on it, I will be able to, you might be able to have a link here that says something like Save File. Go ahead and choose that option. If you're using Safari, you'll probably have an option that says something like Save File. If you go ahead and do that, it will save that file into your Downloads folder. I here actually have a different option. If I just click on this, because of my browser, I have the option to click on the file and then click on these dots, and I can download this. And it's just going to download it into my Downloads folder. That's fine. You can download the files that way too. So go through and download those files. Again, it depends on your browser. If you're using Safari and you right-click, or on your Mac computers here in the lab, Control and then click, you'll have an option here to save the file. Save link won't do anything, but if you save the file to just save the file, that will save it onto your computer. Because of the browser that I'm using, which is a Chrome browser, I can click through on the file and then download each individual file. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. The only file that you don't need to download is the one that says mix. As I download these, I'll let you know. There's a file there. Just going to go through all of this. The only file you don't need to download is this one called mix. We don't have to worry about this one, but I'm going to download this music file. And I will download this ambient file. I'm going to go through and just download all of these. They're not huge files. It shouldn't take a super long time. And I'm going to finish with this one here, the Stefan one. Okay. Once I've got those files downloaded, I'm going to go into my blue face, the Finder icon. I've got my 2 little windows open here. One window says 8-step mix, one window says downloads. Inside of this 8-step mix folder, I need to make some other folders here. So I'm going to go to File, New Folder. I'll make one file called Audio. And then I'll go click outside of this somewhere, then go to File, New Folder, and make another one called Sessions. And we can just do that for now. I'm going to open up this audio folder right here. And I'm going to take all of those audio files I just downloaded from our Blackboard page. They're here in my Downloads folder. If I just click on the first one and then hold Shift and click on the last one there, I can just drop these into that folder. So now I have all those audio files on my computer, download them from Blackboard, and they're organized. They're not just in some random folder on my computer. They are in my 8-step mix folder, in my audio folder, and that's good to go. Okay. I'm going to keep Finder open. I'm going to keep this open. I'm going to go to my browser here, and I'm just going to, at the top, click on the browser, whether it says Chrome or Safari, and I'm going to choose to hide it, just so that's clear. It's not there anymore. And I'm going to open up Audition on my computer. Audition might be down here in your dock. If it's not in the dock, you can go up here to this magnifying glass at the top and just type in Audition and start opening up that program. As you open up that program, once the program opens, you're going to need to sign in with your Adobe ID in order to use this program. I don't have it here because I'm already signed in, but you'll need to sign in with your Adobe ID to use a program on any of these computers for the first time. Once you're signed in, you'll see a window that looks something like this. To start a new session, I'm going to click up here where it says multi-track. I'm going to start a new multi-track session. I'm going to call it 8-Step Mix and then my name. And before clicking OK, I'm going to click on Browse right here. And I'm going to go to my desktop, find that 8-Step Mix folder that I just made, find this Sessions folder that I just made, click on that, choose Choose. The rest of this can stay the same. Click OK. And there you have it. I have my session right here. My session has a bunch of tracks. It's completely empty right now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hover my mouse over the left side of any of these tracks here and just scroll until I can see all of them. So I can see all of my tracks. It's nice for me to see all of them so I can see I have 6 tracks and my mix right here is what I have right now. That's great. That's a good place to start. Okay, I'm going to go to my blue face, the Finder icon here. I'm going to go into my audio folder. I've got my different tracks here. My phoner, Dave, host, music, Sarah, and Stefan. I can just click and drag to highlight all of these, and then I will click and drag them into this top left panel right here called Files. When I do that, Audition actually creates another file in my folder. They're called PKF file or peak files. It's basically just a bit of code. You don't have to worry about that. Just go back to Audition. Here are my audio files right here. Phoner, Dave, host, music, etc. I've got them all here. I want to add these files now into my session. I want to put them all in their own track. So I'm going to click on underneath 8-Step Mix. Here are my audio files themselves. I'm going to click on the first one, scroll down, hold Shift, click on the last one. So I've got all those highlighted. Then I'm going to hold the Option key on my keyboard and click and drag these tracks into my session. And Audition has even actually created a track 7, because I had 7 files here. It's created a track for each of these files. Awesome. Now the thing is that these tracks are not organized right now, and they're also not named properly. So right here it's called track 1. That doesn't really help me very much. This one's called track 2, this one's called track 3. What I want is for all these tracks to be named after the content that's actually in them. I want them to be named after the content that's in them. So track 1 has Craig Phoner. I can just call it, I'm going to call it Craig, and then Phoner. Phoner means it was a phone interview, and I've named that track Craig Phoner. Track 2 is called Dave. It's an interview with Dave. So I can just click on the word track 2 on this track here to change this. I'm going to rename it to Dave. Track 3 is the host. So I'm going to rename this one to host. Track 4 is the music. I'll rename this to music. Track 5 is the some ambient sound from Sarah. So I'm going to call this Sarah Ambi. Track 6 is Sarah. It's a person talking, Sarah. And then track 7 is Stefan. Person talking named Stefan. So now all of my tracks are named properly. And the next thing I need to do is organize these tracks. My host track should always be on top. So the host, when you record your narrative podcast, you'll be the host. I want this to be on top. I can move it just by actually hovering my mouse over the far left of the track until it becomes this little hand icon, and then clicking and dragging it. The next thing I want to do is I want to have my actualities go underneath my host. So anytime there's a person talking. So Craig Phoner is an actuality, Dave is an actuality, the music is not an actuality. So I'm going to move that down to the bottom. It'll be right on top of the mix channel there. Let's see, Stefan, Sarah. Sarah is an actuality, but actually she also has ambient sound underneath her. I'm going to put Sarah on top of the ambient sound. And then the next step I'm going to do is to cascade these tracks. Let me show you what I mean by this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom all the way out. Up here at the top, I have this little zoom bar. If I hover my mouse over the far left or right of this, I can zoom this all the way out. Or if you want to zoom all the way out at any time, you can just use the / key on your keyboard. It's right underneath the delete key. That will just zoom you all the way out. And what you can see when you're looking at this is there are some actualities where like for example, Craig's phoner, he doesn't say anything until about the 1 minute 55 second mark here. The process of cascading is making it so that every actuality happens from left to right. So the first actuality shows up at the top. So Dave is the first actuality where I hear someone speaking after the host. I'm going to move him up to this track number 2. So we'll go from host, then to Dave. The next person who speaks, the next time I have a person speaking it's my host, but then after that it is Stefan. So I'm going to move Stefan up to this 3rd space here. Again, I'm cascading these tracks. The next person who I hear speaking is Sarah. So I'm going to move Sarah up there. And I'm also going to move Sarah's ambient sound to be underneath her. Then I have Craig, my phoner. He's the last person to speak. And then I have my music that happens down here. What I've done is I've cascaded my actualities. What that means is that the actuality where it's the first person who speaks, that happens on the left. And then the second track is a little bit further in. You can see this kind of diagonal movement here from left to right of the order of these actualities happening. So I've cascaded my tracks. I've organized, renamed, and cascaded my tracks. That's a really important step for putting together your mix. Okay. The next step I want to do is a step that's called roughing in levels. What I want to do is I want to make it so that all of my tracks of my people speaking are roughly about the same level, roughly about the same loudness level. The thing is you can probably tell from this, just from looking at the waveforms, that Dave talks a little bit quieter than Stefan. And that actually Sarah talks quite a bit quieter than Stefan. Right? You can just see that by looking at the waveforms. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool called a loudness meter to just kind of measure to get all of these sounds to be about the same. This is called roughing in the levels. To do this, I'm going to add an effect to my mix channel here. So I'm going to click on my mix channel, and then I'm going to go up to effects. And the tool that I want is called the loudness meter, and I'm forgetting where it is, so I'm actually just going to use the help tool here to find loudness meter. Here it's under special, yes, it's under effects, special, and then loudness meter. I'm going to add a loudness meter, and this is an effect that I've added to my mix track. It's not an effect that actually does anything, it's just an effect that helps me understand where my levels are. Okay, I've done that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find my host track here, and I can just hover my mouse over all my tracks, and I'm going to zoom in so that they're really big, so I can see them. When I do that, my host track, I can see 2 lines here. This one here in the middle is the pan. I'm going to hold on to that. I'm not going to move that. This line here is the volume for this track. And if I click and hold, I can move this up or down. I can move the volume of her track up or down. It starts at 0 decibels, which doesn't mean silent. It just means the baseline. And I can move it up or down below 0 decibels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my loudness meter to try to get all of my tracks at about the same loudness, and what I'm going to shoot for is about minus 22 decibels. So I'm going to move my playhead before a moment where my host speaks. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Okay, hold on, I've just got an issue here with my audio. Give me just a moment. This is not an issue that you'll run into. I'm just going to use my speakers here. Let's see if that...
But now all kinds of companies apply them to workers, including at the lowest level, creating restrictions.
So what I'm looking at is I'm actually looking at the kind of overall loudness level of the way that this person speaks. And the numbers I'm looking at here are short-term and integrated for the loudness. This basically means about how loud she is speaking. Right now she's a little bit soft. She's at minus 26, 27 decibels. I'm kind of looking at an average between the short-term and the integrated. So I'm going to move her up about 3 or 4 decibels, and I'm going to go ahead and play her again.
But now all kinds of companies apply them to workers, including at the lowest level, creating restrictions.
And that's about where I want to be. So my short-term and my integrated loudness are now at about minus 22, and that's where I want that to be. So that's good for her. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here and do the same thing for Dave. So I'm going to move my playhead over to the beginning of where Dave speaks, hit play.
Back at Tahoe, surfer Ivy Miller is just coming out of the water after.
He's also a little bit low. He's kind of hovering there around 28. So I'll move his volume up, maybe let's say 4 decibels or so. And then move my playhead to the beginning of him speaking, play that again.
Surfer Ivy Miller is just coming out of the water after spending several hours out there with her
He's at 24. He's still a little low, so I'll pull him up just a little bit more.
friends. She grew up in Southern California, where surfing means.
And that's going to help me get there to the right range. Okay, going to move to Stefan now. I'm going to scroll down here, move to the Stefan track. All right, and let's play this one.
He understands that, his voice can suck a lot of oxygen out of the room and that he needs to give space.
So he's also a little bit quiet. What you might notice about Stefan is that even though his waveforms look really big, he's still pretty quiet. He just has a few places here where it really kind of like peaks. That's going to create a problem for me later that I'm going to use a tool called compression to fix. But right now I'm just going to roughen these levels. I'm going to bump him up about 4 or 5 decibels to get him to the point where he's again an average around that minus 22 mark. I moved him up a little bit too much, so I'll drop him down to maybe 4 decibels or so. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to go to this track here and roughen the levels on this one.
It's not easy, so it's hard. Even though they might be curious about it.
Again, this one's pretty low. I'm going to move this up to 20, move this up to 4.5 or so.
It's not easy, so it's hard.
And I'm not going to touch the ambient track here. That's not necessary right now. And I will do my phoner. Oh, so with my phoner, the issue is I've got Craig speaking, my phoner, but I also have music underneath this. This is some music that's supposed to play underneath Craig. That's going to affect what I hear in my loudness meter, right? That's going to affect what I hear there in my loudness meter. So I'm going to solo this Craig track just by clicking on the S next to him. So it's only going to play the Craig track. And now I'll play this Craig track.
Comes out as a very interesting list.
Again, I see that Craig is a little bit low, so I'm going to move him up. Again, another 4.5 or so decibels.
But also,
trying to get him so he's on average around that minus 22 mark. Then I'm going to unsolo that Craig track, and I'm not going to roughen levels for music or for ambient sound or anything like that. But that is the roughen levels process. I've done that now. I can close that. The next step is for me to decide if any of my tracks need EQ. EQ is a way of deciding whether my tracks have the right balance between bass and treble. You could say, do my tracks sound too bassy? Do they sound too trebly? Do they sound sibilant, or do they sound boomy? That's what I'm trying to determine, and EQ can help me fix that problem. I'm thinking of the tone of the voice. It has to do with their voice, but also with the way they were recorded. I know my host is okay, so I'm not going to mess with my host. I'm going to start with Dave, and I'm going to move my playhead at the beginning of what Dave says, and just listen.
Back at Tahoe, surfer Ivy Miller is just coming out of the water after spending several hours out there with her friends.
And because I have my headphones in, it's very important to have your headphones in for this whole process. I've got my headphones in, I'm listening to this, and I'm deciding that with my headphones in, he sounds a little bit bassy. He sounds a little bit boomy or bassy to me. So I'm going to add an EQ effect to my Dave track. So I'm just going to click on the Dave track, then go to Effects, Filter and EQ, and the EQ effect I want is this one. It's called the 10-band EQ. From here, I have some presets I can use. What I want to do under my preset here is I'm going to do a simple bass cut. I'm going to cut Dave's bass a little bit, and I'm just going to trust my ears. With my headphones on, I'm going to listen to this and see if I think the sound sounds right.
Is just coming out of the water after spending several hours out there with.
I might cut some bass a little bit more. I don't want to go too much because it'll make it sound really tinny. But I can adjust this a little bit here. What I'm doing is I'm kind of adjusting the lower frequencies down, but keeping the higher frequencies where they are.
Back at Tahoe, surfer Ivy Miller is just coming.
And I think I've got it roughly even there. I can close that. If I ever want to get back to that effect that I just had, all I have to do is click on the track that I have the effect on. I can go to my effects rack right here, find this effect, double click, and I can see that effect. I can also turn the effect on or off by just clicking on this little green icon right here. that will turn the effect off so I can hear like a before and after.
Hours out there with her friend.
That's really helpful. Do the EQ on all of these tracks. Make sure to run an EQ on all these tracks. I'll go ahead and run an EQ on this Stefan track real quick so you can kind of see an idea what that looks like. Actually, I'll go ahead and do it on the Sarah one. I think this is an easier one to do an EQ on. So I'm going to run an EQ on Sarah. I'm going to go to Effects, Filter and EQ, Graphic EQ. I know that Sarah sounds a little bit bassy as well.
It's not easy, so it's hard.
So I'm going to then again do a simple bass cut for her. For Stefan, actually I can go ahead and do this. I think for Stefan, he is a little bit, to me, a little bit sibilant, which means a little bit like harsh in his S's. So I'm going to go ahead and do a simple high cut on Stefan, and I can again, as I'm listening, make adjustments here. Not all of your tracks will need EQ, but go ahead and run an EQ on all of your tracks except for your music and your ambient tracks. You don't need to run an EQ on those. But you can go ahead and run an EQ on all of your tracks. Okay, so we've got EQ on those. The next thing I need to decide is if I need compression. Do any of my tracks need compression? Compression is something that I can do to minimize an effect that I have when someone's speaking has a lot of peaks and valleys. So for example, if they speak like really, really quiet, and then it gets really loud, and then they get really quiet, and they get really loud, or if they speak really loudly at the beginning of their phrase, like they always come into a phrase like this, and they always get, they always kind of go from loud to soft or something like that. Compression can help even that out a little bit, and that's a really important step that you can take. I know just by looking at it that my Stefan track needs some compression because he has these really loud peaks, but then he also has these deep valleys here in his loudness. So I'm going to add in a compression effect here. I'm going to go up, I'm going to click on my Stefan track, go up to Effects. I'm going to find my amplitude and compression, and I'm going to use this multi-band compressor, I think is the one I want. No, I think it's a single band compressor is actually what I'm looking at. My single band compressor, a very simple compressor here. Then I'm just going to give, these are just kind of rule of thumb numbers you can put for this single band compressor. My ratio should be 1.5 to 1. That's my ratio. My attack should be 11 milliseconds. And my release can stay at 100 milliseconds. Here's what I'm going to do. Now that I'm going to keep this open, the next thing I'm going to adjust is my threshold, but I'm not going to adjust my threshold until I've listened to this Stefan speak. What I want to see is I want to see how this compressor is working. What this compressor should be doing is it should be lowering the overall decibel rate of Stefan by about 2 decibels or so. That's what I'm looking for. When I move my playhead over Stefan, and I actually go and look at my effects rack, I'm actually going to see 2 little play bars here, 2 little sound bars here, amplitude bars. One says input, one says output. What these are going to tell me is how loud it was before the compressor effect and how loud it is after the compressor effect. So I'll hit play.
He understands that, his
So you can see that my compressor is adding a little bit of compression. You can see that it's slightly lower. What I want is for my compressor to be bringing that output down by about 2 decibels. And the way I can do that is by lowering this threshold here. So I'm going to lower my threshold here. Let's lower it by about 10. And let's see then if that is getting this to the level I want.
understands that, his voice can suck a lot of oxygen
It's not doing a lot yet, so I'm going to lower this compressor, this threshold even more.
to the next generation of progressive leadership to take the reign.
That's starting to reduce it there.
Understands that,
Maybe lower the
his
threshold a little bit
voice
more.
can suck a lot of oxygen out of the room and that he needs to give space.
So what that's done is in my first track here, my first little loudness meter, before the compressor has been added, you can see that he peaks, and we get those scary red bars that are showing me that he's peaking. That's just because of the way he's speaking. Maybe he's too close to his microphone or something like that. Underneath that, I can see that what my compressor is doing is it's bringing down those peaks so he doesn't peak, he doesn't get into that red zone. That's what I want there. So I know I've got my compressor there. Definitely add compression to the Stefan track. The other one I think really needs compression is this Craig Phoner track would need some compression. So I'm going to go through that process again. I'm going to click on my Craig Phoner, go to Effects, Go to amplitude and compression. Just do this single band compressor. Again, it's 1.5 to 1 is my ratio, 11 milliseconds is my attack, 100 milliseconds is my release. Let's give it a listen.
And, you know, it
Again, I'm going to solo this Craig Phoner here.
comes out as a very interesting list. Concentration.
And I'm looking for about a 2 decibel reduction here using that
Very
threshold.
interesting list. Concentration in New York and Pennsylvania. Interesting list.
And yeah, that's about right. That's about what I need. All right. So I have done compression. I've done EQ. And I'm in a pretty good spot. Okay. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to continue my recording. The next thing I'm going to do is, well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this recording, and I'm going to go into catch-up mode for everyone. This is the point, we're at the point where we left off on Tuesday. So I'm going to stop this recording so I can help people get to this point before we go to our next steps. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end of our 8-step mix. This is pretty exciting. We're going to do the next step here, which is to start isolating some tracks here. So my top track here as my host, and as you can see, I have places where my host is speaking, but I also have places where my host is not speaking, where it's completely silent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut out that empty space, that dead space there. So let's focus on the host track first. I'm going to go ahead and click on my host track. I'm going to move my mouse over. I can move it over any point over here and just use my scroll wheel to make these tracks bigger. I want to see my host track here. I'm going to move my playhead over roughly about the point where she stops speaking. And then I'm going to use my cut tool, or my razor tool, to cut this space out. That razor tool is at the top of your window here. It's this one here. It looks like a razor blade. You can also get there just by pressing the letter R on your keyboard. And I'm going to use the razor tool to cut right at this point. And now what I've done is I've made a cut there. I've actually cut this track into 2 pieces here. I'm going to move my playhead over right to where the beginning of where she starts to talk again. Use my razor tool to cut right there. And now you can see I've got mine cut into 3 pieces. Now if you use your mouse anywhere on this track while you have the razor blade tool selected, it's going to make cuts like this. So keep that in mind if you don't want to make a cut. If you make a cut accidentally, a cut that you don't want to make, you can just go up to Edit and undo that razor, or Command Z. I've got 3 sections here. I've got a section of her talking, a section of dead space, and a section of the rest of the track. I want to delete this empty section here. In order to do this, I need to go back to my regular selection tool, my Move tool here. So I'm going to click there. You can also just get there by pressing the letter V on your keyboard. That will make my mouse so it's no longer a razor blade. I can click at this empty space, delete that empty space. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm not going to move anything around. I'm just cutting out this empty space. I can go ahead and just roughly cut out those empty spaces. Make sure you're not cutting out any of her actual speaking. Then use my Move tool to just highlight that empty space and remove it. Okay, I've got that. I've added that for her. The next thing I can do is I'm actually going to start fading in or out just slightly the beginning and end of those spaces where she speaks. And let me show you what I mean by this. To do this, we're going to have to zoom in on one of these chunks. We're going to have to zoom in on this chunk. So find your scroll bar at the top here, this zoom bar, hover your mouse over the far right or left, and start scrolling in here so I can zoom in. So I can see this track right now. My track right now is at constant volume.
Originally, non-compete
She starts speaking, that's fine. If I wanted her to actually kind of fade in a little bit, so she doesn't start at her like top volume, but starts out a little bit quieter and fades in slowly, a simple tool for doing this is actually on the top left and top right of the track itself. You can see this little square here with a little diagonal line through it. If I hover my mouse over that, my mouse becomes a funny looking arrow thing. And if I click and drag, I can create a linear fade effect here. And I'm going to do that, just a very short one here. And you can hear her slowly fade in. The longer you make it, the longer she'll take to fade in. If you make it very short, she'll fade in very quickly. You can experiment with that to see how that sounds. That's a little bit too slow, so I'm going to move this over here a bit more. I want her to come in pretty quickly.
Originally, non-compete
There we go. I
clauses
just have a
were used
very
for
slight
executives
fade
and
there.
for
Sure, I'm going to show you how to do it on the other side of the track here too. So on the other side of the track, let's show you how to do it on the other side of the track here. What I've done is I've made my cut a little bit too late here. Like my cut is a little bit further after she speaks. I'm going to go ahead and hover my mouse over the far edge of this track and just shrink this down a little bit so it stops right at the end of her speaking. At the top right here, there's this little box, this funny looking box that has a diagonal line through it. If I hover my mouse right over that box, my mouse turns into a funny looking arrow thing. And then if I click and drag, I'm going to start to see a linear fade effect happen right there. And I can fade out what she says right here.
intellectual property or trade secrets.
Back at top.
So I can start to fade her out a little bit. I don't want to fade her out too much. I want her to be pretty consistent, but this is a useful tool that you'll use.
Clauses were used for executives and for people in high-tech positions where companies wanted to protect intellectual property or trade secrets.
Back at top.
So I've just faded that out a little bit. Let's start doing this with our other tracks too. So I'm going to do this with my, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to my next track with her, my next host track. I'm going to hover over the far left so my mouse becomes this kind of red tool so I can squeeze the track in all the way to just the point where she ends her speaking. I'm going to use my fade. I'm not going to fade her in a lot. I don't want her to come in like super slowly. Like if I do this, she'll come in very slowly and be almost silent for a few seconds.
Now, all kinds of companies apply them to workers, including at the lowest
Now, that's
level.
not what I want. I want her to come in quicker, but just not quite as hot as she was before.
But now, all kinds of companies apply.
I'll do the same thing on the end of this one. Have her come out a little bit at the end.
Policy advisor for the New York Attorney General.
You won't always need to do this, but just for the sake of our 8-step mix, it's good for us to practice with this. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this for the end of this track too. I'll zoom out a little bit so I can see this one more fully. Punching her in and out a little bit just to have that done. Same thing with these ones. And again, you're doing this with headphones in because that's the only way, with headphones in, is the only way that you'll actually be able to evaluate whether this sounds right or not. Okay. So I've done some just gentle fades with these. I'm going to do the same process with my Dave. You can do the same process with your Dave track, with your Stefan track. With these ones, a little bit simpler. You just have one thing that they say. So I'm going to use the cut tool to isolate out this one thing that Dave says. Then I will go back to my move tool to select those dead spaces and delete those. Then I'll zoom in. Maybe squish this in just a little bit more. And maybe if it feels like it's necessary, fade Dave in a little bit.
Property or trade secrets.
Back at Tahoe, surfer Ivy Miller.
Okay, I've done that for Dave. I'm going to do this for Stefan now. This time, instead of using the razor tool, I'm just squishing in that way. I'm just doing this over and over so you can kind of see the process, how it looks. You can do this for all these tracks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead here to this ambient track here. We haven't really messed with this ambient track. What we have, though, is some ambient sound that's underneath Sarah. Go ahead and solo this ambient, and you might have to turn up the speakers on your computer in order to hear what this sounds like. But let's hear what this ambient sounds like. What is this ambient sound? What does it sound like? It's people talking like in a market or something like that, right? Again, you won't be able to know if you're not wearing headphones. I hope the lesson of today of bring your headphones has come through loud and clear. Yeah, it's like people in a market. The thing is when this interviewer talked to Sarah, they talked to her in some sort of market or something like that. It was a noisy space, and in order to have better control over that, they've added an ambient track here of just the sound of that market. I would actually like for the sound of this market to be a little bit louder, just to give me a little bit more of the sense of this space. So I'm going to go to my market one here. I'm going to click on this volume meter here. I'm going to turn this up a bit. And I'm going to solo just the market and Sarah.
It's not easy, so it's hard. Even though the
I'm also going to zoom in so I can see it really clearly here. So what I'm going to start to do is, what I want to do is I actually want to hear, I want this sound of this market stuff to actually happen a little bit earlier. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find my market sound. I'm going to find just where the waveforms start to come in. And actually another thing here is, one thing you might have noticed is these waveforms are really small. They're really hard to see, right? Go ahead and actually take your volume and move it down to 0. I'm sorry, I led you astray there. Move your volume down to 0 for the market here. Down here at the bottom left, there's this little bars thing here. It kind of looks like a Wi-Fi bars on this track, on this Sarah ambient track. If I click on this and hold, I can actually increase these waveforms here. So I'm drastically increasing the gain on this track. If I solo just the track, I can hear what that sounds like. So I've greatly increased the gain on this track. I'm not stopping for questions right now. Greatly increasing the gain on this track so I can hear it very clearly. I like this sound. I don't need it to be as loud as it is right now, but what I want it to do is I want this sound to kind of slowly fade in underneath Sarah. So I'm going to squish this track a little bit, not all the way. I'll do the same thing with Sarah. What I want us to do is I want to immerse us. I want us to feel like we're like in this market, this outdoor market with Sarah. I'm going to zoom in here. This is where we're going to do a fade. I'm going to move this ambient sound a little bit to the left here so it actually starts to come in a little bit before Sarah speaks. I'm going to move, squish this in a little bit here. And then I'm going to use this fade tool to fade this market sound in before Sarah speaks.
it's not easy, so it's hard. Even though they might be curious.
But here's the thing, right now, because I've increased the gain on this track so much, the sound of that ambient sound is kind of overpowering Sarah. You know, Sarah's speaking pretty quietly, it's kind of overpowering her. As soon as Sarah starts speaking, what I need to do is I need to turn down this ambient sound so that it sits underneath Sarah. I can't use this fade tool to do that. Instead, I need to use keyframes. So find the volume bar on this Sarah track, this one that I just told you to turn back down to 0, this one here, this volume bar. And if you double click, if you move your mouse right over that bar and double click, it will create this kind of blue diamond thing right here. That's called a keyframe. Now that can't do anything yet. I need to create a second keyframe. So to the right of that blue diamond, double click on that line again to make a second keyframe. And then if I click on this little keyframe and pull down, I can make the volume on this track go down. And what I want it to do is I want it to start going down as soon as Sarah starts speaking. So let's listen to that.
It's not easy, so it's hard. Even though they might be curious about it, tell them it's not.
So what happens is the sound of that market starts to come up before Sarah speaks. What that does is that immerses us in that environment. But then as soon as Sarah is speaking, we're turning that down so it's not distracting us. I'm going to turn it down even further here.
It's not easy, so it's hard. Even though they might be curious about it, tell them it's not all milk and honey.
And then I don't need, after this point, I don't need the sounds of the market after Sarah's done speaking. So once Sarah's done speaking, I'm going to go ahead and I could do this a couple different ways. Either I can make another keyframe and then one more keyframe, and I can move this all the way down to infinite minus infinity. That will just make it go down all the way, like that. So that just makes that go away. Or I can use my fade tool. I can just squish this in around here or so, use my fade tool to make sure this starts fading out around that point. Either way is fine. What I've done is a combination of things. I've done a fade tool to fade the track in, and then I've used keyframes to bring that sound back down while Sarah's speaking.
It's not easy, so it's hard, even though they might be
So now I can
curious
hear
about
those sounds of the market just kind of sitting underneath Sarah.
they can hide.
And then when she's done, those sounds of the market fade down. Perfect. That is something that you will use a lot with your narrative podcast, with your NAT sound. Your immersive sounds that you will use, you will fade them in before someone speaks so that they get louder, and then you will turn them down so that the person speaking can be more clear, and then you'll fade them out the rest of the way when that's done. I'm going to unsolo these tracks, so I have all of my tracks active again. And I'm going to do the same thing with my music here. So right here is I have Craig and some music. Let's listen to what this sounds like. I'm going to move my playhead over to the beginning of where the music starts playing.
Rents and develops communal office spaces that individuals and companies can then
So there's a couple things happening here.
Within a decade, WeWork has become the world's biggest player in that industry.
And, you know, it comes out as
So what's happening here is the host is speaking, and as she's speaking, in the middle of her speaking up here at the top, this music is starting to come in. But the music is kind of overpowering her.
Communal office spaces that individuals
You can hear that music is kind of overpowering her. So here's where we need to do a little bit of mixing. I'm going to scroll here so that I can make my music track bigger. I'm going to squeeze this in. The music track isn't quite so large. And I'm going to fade in this music track so that it comes in a little more quietly while this host is speaking.
It rents and develops communal office spaces that individuals and companies can then lease on a monthly basis. Within a decade, WeWork has become the world's biggest player.
Now the mix is still a little bit loud. I think this mix is, I still think the music is kind of overpowering her a little bit. So I'm going to click on my volume bar here. I'm going to move this down to, let's say, about -4 or so decibels, -3.5. So that music is underneath her, but not overpowering her. It's fading in, and I've also turned it down so it's not too loud.
It rents and develops communal office spaces that individuals
Only way to know you're getting this right, trust your ears. Trust your ears with your headphones in.
WeWork has become the world's biggest player in that industry.
and, you know, it comes
I'm even going to turn it down a little bit more, maybe -6 or so.
Develops communal office spaces that individuals
So that
and
music is
companies
fading
can then
in.
lease on a monthly basis. Within a decade, WeWork has become the
It's
world's
not too
biggest
loud
player
underneath
in
her.
that industry.
It's also going to be underneath this guy speaking.
very interesting list.
What happens with the music is as it moves on, as the kind of the, you can actually see it, the waveforms here, you can see the sound of this music gets louder, right? These waveforms start to get louder and louder. To correct for that, I need to start turning it down a little bit, especially as Craig starts talking. So as soon as Craig starts talking, I'm going to find that volume bar again. I'm going to double click on that line to make a keyframe, double click to make another keyframe, and start moving this down as Craig is speaking, and also just fade this out toward the end.
And develops communal
It's going to get quieter while Craig is speaking because the music itself is composed so that it gets louder. It kind of is a crescendo there. I'm kind of undoing that crescendo.
that industry.
And, you know, it comes out as a very interesting list. Concentration in New York and Pennsylvania, but also there's other companies up there that have a number of leaks in Texas or Virginia.
WeWork is not alone in attracting regular.
And there I have done that mix. Okay. Once I've completed those steps, I have completed a mix here. I'm going to go up to File and hit Save. I'm going to make sure to save this project. And then to export it, I'm actually going to go ahead and make an export as well, just so we can cover what exporting is. So once I'm done with this, I have my mix. I'm going to go up to File and then Export. I'm going to choose this option here, Multi-Track Mixdown, and export the entire session. The file name I'm going to choose is 8-Step Mixdown is fine. You can also just remove this word mix down here. It always has that word mix down when you add it. You can remove that if you want to. So it's just called 8-step mix. Under Browse, I'm going to click Browse. I'm going to go to that folder I had before, my 8-step mix folder. Oh, and I don't have it, I didn't make an exports folder, so I will click on New Folder here, make an exports folder. It'll go in this exports folder. And then for my format, MP3 is the lowest quality format. I'm actually going to choose this format here called AIFF. That's the uncompressed audio file. Click OK. And now I have an export of this mix down. That will be actually the last step that you'll do in your podcast project, is you will mix everything and then export it. Okay, I'm going to start going around and taking questions, but that is the 8-step mix. What you will submit for this assignment, let's go over that too. What you'll submit for this assignment is find your 8-step mix folder. I'd like you to do is this 8-step mix folder that's on your computer. Please just go ahead and go into our Blackboard page to submit this. Go to our Blackboard page. You can go to your, go ahead and go to your My Files folder here. You'll find this on our Blackboard page. This will just take you to your own OneDrive. If you want to make a folder for this class, that's fine. I will go ahead and do that now. I'll make a folder for this class. I'm going to call it with my name at the end so I know it's my personal folder. Okay, you've got your folder in your OneDrive. I'm going to go to my blue face guy here, take my 8-step mix folder, the whole folder, and just drag and drop it into here. One thing that's really important, don't go away from this page until everything is done uploading. You'll know it's done uploading when you click on this uploading bar right here, and you can see it's doing the uploading. It's going to take a while for it to upload. It's still kind of doing it. You can see it's kind of taking some time here. So don't go away from this page until it's done uploading, or else I won't see anything in these folders. To submit the 8-step mix, you can just hover your mouse over this folder that you're working on uploading. Click on this little share icon, and click here where it says Copy Link. You can just copy that link. Go to our Blackboard page. Find the assignment. It's in week 10, I believe. It's actually in week 9, sorry. Find the 8-step mix. Where it says Write Submission, text submission, click on Write Submission. Then in this bar here where you can write a submission, just Command V. It will just create a link right there. And then you can click Submit. You can do that actually before it's done uploading, but again, don't walk away from this page until everything is done uploading, or else I won't be able to see anything. And then you can submit. So you're just submitting this link to your 8-step mix folder. And then the assignment is done. Okay, I'll stop the recording now so I can help folks, and then I'll upload this recording later on for you to review.